Dr. James Lindsay. He is an American-born author, mathematician, a political commentator. He's written 6 books spanning a range from subjects including religion, the philosophy of science, and postmodern theory. Dr. Lindsay is the founder of New Disclosures, an organization dedicated to shining the light of objective truth in subjective darkness. He's the co-author of Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. And he is the author of the new book, Race Marxism. He's been a featured guest on Fox News, Glenn Beck, Joe Rogan, NPR. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. James Lindsay.
Setting the timer because we'll be here all night. Thank you all so much for having me in Charleston. I'm really excited to be here. I've only been here once before and I was a little kid, so it's pretty exciting to get down here and see it again. It's been a lovely city. It's been a very encouraging. Let me give you guys a message of hope to start off, because hope isn't my brain, so let's just get it out of the way. It's just not what I do. So I'll give you a couple actually. First one I want to give you. I was walking around today downtown, walked down to the Battery, walked around, checked out a bunch of stuff. I'm wearing my OK Groomer shirt, which I don't normally wear in public. Some lovely moms for Liberty in Virginia made me this after I got kicked off Twitter for saying OK Groomer to somebody who's trying to groom our kids. And so I wear it, and I had like a dozen people stop me. I love your shirt. I love your shirt. So this one guy stops me and he's like, I love your shirt, and he kind of stalled out. I don't want to put him on the spot in case he's here. He kind of stalled out and he put his fist up kind of like this, like, America. America. Because he didn't know what to say next. And I was like, this guy votes. This guy is going to vote. Charleston, I have never received a reception for that shirt anywhere like I have here in Charleston. So the energy here is going like the energy here is going the right way because of organizations like Moms for Liberty, because of you all. People are showing up and they're trying to understand what's going on in the world. So thank you. Thank you for everything you guys are doing. I'm just making noise. People like me are just making noise. People that are doing journalism about this are just showing people stuff. But if people don't do something with it, we're just making noise. So thank you so much. You have a wonderful community. I see a lot of hope here already. In the bigger picture, I see hope too. I'll try to make sure my metaphors are comfortable, but I think if we want to use the metaphor of Goliath, I'm not going to go straight biblical and talk about having 5 stones in my pocket or anything fun. What I want to say is that Goliath, if we will, has stepped in the bear trap. He's not down, he's not out, he's got a leg in the bear trap, and he stuck that leg right in the bear trap. I think he stuck his leg in the bear trap about 8 times now. But he particularly stuck that leg in the bear trap when he decided to mess with our kids. And that's why this organization is so valuable and so important, and that's why I know that Goliath isn't nearly as big a threat as he looks like he is with his legs stuck in a great big bear trap called mama bears. But I want to do something a little different to start off. Hang tight. Hopefully I won't go forever with this. I was thinking about this afternoon, and I want to give you guys, this is a very big, I was talking to Terry yesterday, this is very big, it's a historical election here in Charleston. You guys have 9 out of 9 up for school board. We all know that there is the possibility, supposing we have a clean and fair election, of a tremendous red wave. This is a historic election. This is, in fact, a very big election, not just here locally, but also nationally. But it's also very, very important that we remember that this is a very big election locally. But what I want to do is I want to make a point that what's going on here, the reason this election is such a big deal, why it's a historic election, is because we're at a historical moment, this is going to sound dumb, in history. You ever say something and then you're like, I'm about to use the same word twice? We're at a historical inflection point, as a matter of fact. And so what I was thinking about is like, well, there have been a number of big historical inflection points. And I want to give you a sense of where we are. Okay? And just like the Madison Minute, it's really a blessing that it's in our time that we can deal with this so that our children can have peace, because this is a big one. So the kinds of historical inflection points I want to compare our present moment to are things like, I don't want to upset anybody's religious sensibilities, but I'm going to pick a number out of the air, roughly 10,000 years ago, when people decided, hey look, we can plant things and grow them, and then we don't have to wander around like nomads, hunting and gathering wherever we go. The agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution, the reason I want to give you this long view, now that you know when I say long view, I mean all the way. This is literally the beginning of history, because the beginning of when we started writing things down followed after the agricultural revolution. The reason I want to give you this perspective is because the people we're against, this Goliath character, if you will, has this view. And if we don't understand his mind, we don't understand how to win. This is how they, to invoke the scary pronoun, this is how they see the world. That they are at the cusp of an inflection point as big as the agricultural revolution in terms of what it means for humanity. And their goal is to seize control of that and direct it to their ends with your kids. So 10,000 years ago, people figured out they could plant stuff. This had tremendous impacts. Okay? People could stay in one place and have food. Turns out you can make populations grow if you have a stable, predictable food supply. So populations started to grow. People had to start living closer together, so we started to invent things. Necessity is the mother of invention. So we started to invent things like mathematics, geometry, arithmetic, reading and writing. As a result of having to try to figure out how to portion the good land and deal with the bad land and make it better with irrigation, etc. All of this came out of the need to accommodate the fact of agriculture. This allowed for the birth of something new in the world, which are called cities. Now, I know we're not necessarily big fans of cities, but cities do something that no other human invention allows, and this is really the fruit of the agricultural revolution. Cities spur innovation. In fact, there was a weird study done, I don't remember, 30, 40 years ago, where they showed that for every 10-fold increase in population density, you have a 13-fold increase in innovation. You stick a bunch of people together, you give them a bunch of problems like sanitation to solve, living conditions to solve, food acquisition and distribution to solve, and they start figuring out solutions to problems. So I don't know if we're going to go all the way into this progressive stuff, but this is really the definition of how progress starts to happen. People seeing problems and solving them to make them better. And cities actually are gigantic engines of innovation. And they are the product of the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution 10,000 years ago, or thereabouts. We know it had to be at least 7,000 years ago because there were records of people making beer 7,000 years ago, and that requires growing grain. All right, so we're going to skip over a lot of important details of history. Again, not to offend anybody's religious sensibilities, but I want to talk about another massive inflection point in history about 500 years ago. Of course, as a mathematician, we're now just going to talk about calculus. So what is an inflection point? It is when the second derivative is zero. No, I'm just kidding. What happened about 500 years ago? There was an invention, a piece of innovation that came out that was called the printing press. Gutenberg in Germany comes up with this device. Turns out around the same time, you had this, we'll take some poetic license and call him a crackpot priest in Germany named Martin Luther, who was like, I read all these, I read the scripture, I read all this stuff, and I see the mass and like something ain't matching up here. And so he has this little fit about this and nails a bunch of theses to the wall and begins the Reformation. And the Reformation would not have been able to take off had it not been for the fact of the printing press being able to print very illegally, to print copies of the Bible in vernacular languages of Europe, in particular German. German as a modern language today is structured largely off of Martin Luther's translation of the Bible, which was then printed in German, which could have led to people's deaths. It was printed in English, which could have led to people's deaths. It was printed in French and Italian, etc., not just Latin. This was a capital crime at the time. So we talk about our censorship, we talk about being kicked off Twitter. This is a thing that tyrants do who don't want to lose power, as they try to stamp things down. So Luther starts the Reformation. The Reformation starts a completely different tradition, one where, in fact, reading the Bible becomes incredibly important to people in their own tongues, and so reading becomes very important to people. And so teaching people to read becomes very important to people all throughout Europe. And teaching people to read massively spurs innovation, massively spurs progress, because people can understand the thoughts of other people very clearly at scale, which is not really possible before that. If you can print thousands of copies of a pamphlet, hundreds of thousands of copies of a pamphlet, you can create an American Revolution. The scientific revolution came out of this, for example. The entire world changed. The Enlightenment followed from this. The American experiment followed from this invention. Also, about 200 years of crazy warfare in Europe followed as a result of this. Knowledge is dangerous. So we have the agricultural revolution, we have the printing press. These are inflection points in human history. I don't want to lose the thread of that, because I'll go off forever. One of the fruits of the printing press, though, was the Industrial Revolution. And this is where I really want to take it, because this long view of history actually makes sense. In fact, I'm actually just following the arc of a book by one of the bad guys. His name is Yuval Noah Harari. He is a historian that pretends to be a futurist and scientist for the World Economic Forum. He hates human beings. Read his books. Sapiens is the book I'm kind of tracing the arc of a little bit here. He hates human beings. That's us. I don't know what he thinks he is, but he does not like us. And so the Industrial Revolution unfolds in 4 different stages, and that's how the World Economic Forum thinks, and that's why we have to talk about this. They see the agricultural revolution as a huge step, and that engenders eventually a printing press, and that engenders eventually an enlightenment, a reformation, all these huge changes that then bring about the first industrial revolution when machines started to do all the work, or a lot of it. Machines changed a lot. Huge inflection point in human history. Giant philosophies like Marxism come up in their wake, trying to figure out what the possibilities are. The whole progressive era follows on the back of this. Meanwhile, the scientific revolution's over here doing things that are beyond just mechanics and statics. There's my engineering nod. And they're tooling around with electricity. This is actually going to be like a history of the different fields of engineering, as it turns out. So you have the mechanical engineers figure out the Industrial Revolution, the first one. Then there's a second Industrial Revolution, which was the electric revolution. Electricity starts bursting onto the scene near the beginning of the 20th century. Also petroleum for a massive energy source. We've skipped coal, but that's beside the point. The electrical revolution changes everything again. And actually, if you follow this philosophy, you see all these people talking before the first Industrial Revolution. You hear them talking about, how things are like nature. Vitalism is very big. Gaia theory, kind of earth stuff, is very big. Pagan kind of mysticism is working its way into everything to explain how things work. Everything's like natural systems. Then we have the Industrial Revolution. Everything works like a machine. You have the clockwork universe. Then we have the Electrical Revolution. You have Michel Foucault a little while later writing books saying power works like an electrical grid. And it runs through everybody. And if you cut any of the lines and it doesn't flow, this is the kind of new big metaphor. And so we have this huge inflection point with the introduction of electricity. So far, these are all kind of pointing, these industrial revolutions point in one direction now, which is kind of the same as the agricultural revolution. They enabled more freedom, more innovation, more opportunities and abilities to solve problems, increase comfort, etc. In the 1950s and 60s, computing machines start getting devised. A lot of them are analog, but nevertheless, we enter into a computing revolution. So now we have mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, now computer engineering, and kind of tracing it that way. And we have this huge innovation into the kind of computer digital world, but it's not quite digital yet. And that's the third industrial revolution, and everything changes off the back of computers, which can calculate faster and more accurately than any human being can. And we're on kind of the product of something that is like that. The difference between this aircraft carrier and the aircraft carriers that are out serving our country right now has a lot to do with computers, especially if we start talking about what the guns can do, etc. It's really amazing to find out what this thing could do in the 1940s and 50s. Before that was a big deal. So this is the way that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum trace history. agricultural, printing press, first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, third industrial revolution. In 1971, Klaus Schwab, who is now the chairman of the World Economic Forum, starts toying around with this idea of a new form of capitalism that he calls stakeholder capitalism. And he starts looking forward as time evolves, and he's having his fancy meetings in Davos, Switzerland, starting in 1971. That's how long that's been happening, by the way. 51 years. This is the first year, since we're doing COVID at the beginning, this is the first year where the theme was going to be regaining trust. I'm telling you, Goliath's up to his leg, up to his thigh in a bear trap. And he's looking forward to the fourth industrial revolution. While most of us are trying to live our lives, we're dealing with, oh my gosh, we got this cell phone, we got this other thing. People like Klaus are looking forward, and they recognize, and other people before him, Marshall McLuhan saw this coming a long way out, John Baudrillard saw this coming a long way out, Uncle Ted, who we won't name further, saw this coming a long way out with bad consequences. Okay, it's Ted Kaczynski. He saw it coming a long way out with bad consequences. It's not really a controversial statement. So what they saw was this fourth industrial revolution is going to be a paradigm-defining change. And as Klaus Schwab puts it, the difference between the first three industrial revolutions, mechanical, electrical, and computing, and the fourth industrial revolution is that the first three changed our conditions, and the fourth industrial revolution changes you. And he means it literally. Yuval Noah Harari says humans are hackable animals. They talk incessantly not just about things like, using a cell phone or having, chips or brain interfaces or whatever other kind of high-tech metaverse plus kind of things. They also talk about the ideas of synthetic biology, which we all got a crash course in last year. What the possibilities of massive mRNA technology might be, gene editing, etc. And they have been planning to control this technology for a while, having seen it coming and having tried to plan for it. So he sees the fourth industrial revolution as an opportunity to transform the world, literally an inflection point as big as the agricultural revolution in history. This is the moment that we have been required to live through. This is therefore the moment that we are required to rise to. If you're not Christian, you just have to do it. It's the right thing to do. If you are a Christian, you're going to stand before your Maker and answer for why you didn't stand up to this when it came. This is that kind of moment, or at least it is for them. That's the scope of what Klaus Schwab and his I guess, globalist friends are thinking throughout all of this whole project. And so Klaus wants to change the world. He wants this to be a truly historic moment to enter into an entirely new system, a stakeholder capitalism, or whatever you want to call it. On the other side of a fourth industrial revolution, he wants there to be global cooperation mediated through his organization, coincidentally, on how to solve all these problems and deal with all these changes. And these changes are coming. Something that would be a fourth industrial revolution is coming. There is not any stopping that. The lie that they perpetuate is that they are the only ones who know what to do with it, or that human ingenuity outside of some central control won't be able to figure these things out. And they, of course, want to be the central control. So Klaus, one of these key baddies, luckily tells us what you're going to do, what you want to do if you're going to transform the world. And he says, well, you need three things, really. This is in his book he wrote this year, which is called The Great Narrative for a Better Future. I'm sure it sounds better in the original German. It's also called The Great Reset, Book 2. In case you wondered if The Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, I guess Klaus is in on it. Seeing as he's named 2 books after this idea. And what he says is, number 1, we have to get governments and corporations to work together. He says in democratic countries we don't like that. We don't think that fascism is a good idea, because that's what that's really called. He calls it a public-private partnership, but it's fascism. When the government and all the major corporations collude to operate as a gigantic monopoly that can get around the laws in Western nations that prevent tyranny that's called fascism, at least in the economic side of it. He says you need one of those, and it needs tools that it can use to kind of goad corporations and institutions and thus individuals into doing what they're supposed to do. And so they devised this thing. It turns out it started at the United Nations in 2003 by a man named James Gifford, who was a hotshot intern, who was trying to figure out the solution to a particular problem. He wanted to solve something to do with deforestation, he had some environmental concern, and what he saw and pitched to the United Nations and got a job out of it was, wouldn't it be interesting if we could cook up some scheme by which we could use all of these trillions of dollars tied up in people's retirement funds, all that pension money. Wouldn't it be great if we could use that to do what's called impact investing? Wouldn't it be great if we could purpose that toward our agendas, environmental agendas, social agendas, and so on? All that money is just sitting there passive. If we, the anointed, the enlightened, the brilliant, the Gnostics, could possibly take control of that money and make sure it does good in the world, we don't just, encourage business as business, we do good in the world. So they came up with this thing called ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance Scoring. We'll score all the corporations, especially the ones that are really large corporations. We're going to score them in terms of how good their environmental policy is, according to us. How good their social corporate responsibility is, according to us. And how good their corporate governance metrics are, according to us. And the pretext they used to do it was they said, well, these are long-term investments. They're pension funds. So we'll just tell everybody that being environmentally, socially, and responsible and well-governed, predict long-term investment success. These are your cash cows. These are the corporations that are going to do great. Turns out that might or might not be true. Impact investing usually isn't true because you're optimizing across more than one variable. I told you we're going to do calculus, rather than just one variable, which is shareholder return. So it's almost guaranteed to do worse, but we could grant that maybe, just maybe, it could work, that the thought is okay, except there's that one little hitch. As they see environmental, social, and governance policy being good. In other words, this becomes, by accident or incident, a power grab, or the biggest tool for a corporate power grab that's ever existed. So they start scoring companies and listing them on special funds, index funds, ETFs, etc., if they have good ESG scores according to their definitions. After the financial collapse in 2008, they all went woke, because all of a sudden they could look really good, and we're socially responsible. We didn't just lose all your money like big time and have to get bailed out big time. Hey, we're the good guys. Look at those bad Occupy Wall Street people. They're racists, and that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. Look at those Tea Party racists. That's what they did. It was only a matter of time until Occupy and the Tea Party figured out that they were on the same side against the same thing, and at that point, they lost. So they made everything woke. The S scores went up, and the investing and the investing bubble grew and grew and grew. Well, we now know that investing bubble is popping. ESG does not return on investment, as one would expect, especially when it's super corrupt. They can decide what's good environmental policy, like dumping 160 million or billion or whatever the number is masks into the ocean, because COVID's an environmental hazard. Forcing vaccines because COVID's an environmental hazard. It seems a little cooked up there, doesn't it? Nuclear power is bad. No, now it's good because Europe's going to freeze and you're going to blame us. That's your E score. Oh, natural gas seems okay, but not that natural gas, but okay. Oh, and by the way, ExxonMobil, you need to divest of all this physical infrastructure and sell it to China, which we hold lots of shares of because ESG stuff, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this is real environmental policy stuff. We don't have to talk about the scams, because this is mostly going to be about education. We don't have to talk about the scams of a lot of the different kinds of things they call renewable energy. Different story. Social justice scores. All of a sudden they have a social justice woke score for everything. They get to make that one up too. Military stuff, you get to hold down military companies and keep them in a bottle under your control by saying that they're socially irresponsible, socially dangerous, no world peace, etc. Whoops, Ukraine conflict. Manufacturing weapons raises your social score now. Elon Musk's Tesla, super high ESG score, doing great. Leader in electric cars, etc., super hip, popular frontline company. Everybody loves it. Elon Musk says, I'm going to buy Twitter. Elon Musk is very socially irresponsible. His ESG score has been dropped because of his social behavior. That's what they did. If it weren't so naked, people would still think it's fake, but they can't help themselves. It's almost unbelievable that they're this brazen. Corporate governance. Hire the people we say. Our guys. Or you have a bad G score. So this is all fake. So Klaus says we're going to make an ESG score. And he says, most companies are just going to go along with it. Most institutions will be dragged around by the fact that, say, the top 3 investment firms, which are BlackRock, the Vanguard Group, and State Street, control something approximating, the estimates range anywhere, depending on how you count things, anywhere between $6 and $20 trillion in assets. They have voting control of almost 40% of the entire S&P 500. And it turns out that allows them to jerk corporations around. What did Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, say? We like forcing behaviors. Markets like authoritarian control. Those are things that he said, justifying this. So Klaus says, we'll get this ESG thing, we'll partner up with the governments through my World Economic Forum, we'll team up together, and we'll top down this thing onto people and onto corporations and onto institutions and just force them to go along with it. And he says, but that isn't enough. He said 3 things. That's one thing. He says the other thing that you need is some corporations are going to say, wait a minute, I don't think this is what I want to do. I have freedom. I'll try my luck. I'll take you on. I got 5 stones in my pocket. No problem. And so he says what we're going to do, though, is what we're going to change the bottom. We're going to take the younger generations, that's what he says, the younger generations, and we're going to make sure that they care so much about these issues in the right way, especially climate change and social inequality issues. We're going to make them care so much about those issues that they won't work for a company that isn't woke, that they won't buy from a company that isn't woke, that they won't be the customer of or the client of or the supplier to a company that isn't woke. We're going to force these companies, this is what Klaus says in his book, we're going to force these companies by creating a bottom-up demand-based pressure in the younger generations, which is going to happen through education. The third thing, and it also depends on education, is that we're going to transform, he says we're going to rewrite the social contract, the glue that holds society together, the values that we share, we're going to rewrite those. And so, in order to facilitate this, and he says that the younger generations are already kind of all in on it. I don't think he understands Gen Z and the so-called centennials are not so happy. In order to get this, he starts promoting back at least in 2015 and possibly earlier this hotshot new form of education called social emotional learning. Particularly tech-infused social emotional learning. Social emotional learning is the future of education, he says. It is the way that you're going to educate the workforce of the future who is going to occupy an economy of the future that will have jobs that nobody even knows what they are yet. Social emotional learning is going to teach the soft skills, emotional management, social skills, that are most important for entering into a job environment that no one's quite sure where it's going to go, except Candace Cronin's. He pushes this to the point of saying that we have to infuse it all, I'm not kidding, all the way down to birth by training nurses to train pregnant mothers in social emotional learning so that it is a completely immersive environment in the child's life from start to finish. This is echoed by, say, CASTLE, the organization that was started in 1994-5 out of a weird New Age spirituality club called the Fetzer Institute. Very weird place, that place. If you didn't know that social emotional learning was born, by the way, at a conference hosted by a New Age spirituality occult group. This is 100% true and easily verified. They write it in their own papers, they write it in their own books. We're going to use this weird social emotional learning to manage the emotions of the children, they say. You read, for example, in UNESCO documents. In 2000, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, kind of a big deal. People say, well, who cares what they write? Have you heard of anything that the United Nations has proposed for education that the United States hasn't decided to do yet? They do everything that the United Nations suggests. Comprehensive sexuality education, you're probably uncomfortable with that. You've probably heard of it. That started in 2003 at the United Nations. UNESCO publishes a document in 2019 called SEL for SDGs. I stumbled on this a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, I guess. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, this can't be real. It's real. SEL, Social Emotional Learning, for SDGs, for the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, which is what the ESG thing was cooked up to fulfill. What do they say? They say that implementing the Sustainable Development Goals and teaching children that it's their job to implement, teaching children it is their job to implement the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 generates, they said, a lot of cognitive dissonance. The kids realize they're not being educated. They're being programmed. They're being made into activists. The kids are being asked, according to their own report, to implement self-contradictory agenda items that have to both be achieved. Doublethink. This generates a feeling of dissonance and emotional malaise, stress, and no tool is better than social emotional learning for managing the cognitive dissonance to teach the children resilience. Resilience is what they call it. Resilience in face of the cognitive dissonance that's going to be dropped on them as a result of being told that it's their job to satisfy the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So social emotional learning then is what? However much you trust it, by the way, you need to trust it less. It's a brainwashing tool. I mean this completely literally. A few months ago, I was on a flight. Imagine this. I fly a lot, by the way. I was on a flight, looking out the window. It was dark. Somebody had recommended it. Usually you have to recommend the book to me about 50 times, and then I'm finally like, fine, I'll read it. Because I have no kidding, my reading list is about like 700 books long right now. And so this book is called, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, the study of brainwashing in China. It's written by a guy I'd heard of who studied cults, and in particular studied China and brainwashing in the Chinese communist prisons, by the name of Robert J. Lifton. And so I finally get this book, and I'm on a plane flying home from Houston, I think, and I'm reading it, and it's dark out, and I kind of finish a chapter, and I don't have time to start another chapter, so I do that thing where you have like 10 more minutes till you land, and you awkwardly finish some stuff, and you're like, I don't know what to do with myself now. And you look out the window at the lights, and I thought, this can't happen here. I'm reading descriptions, vivid descriptions, by a psychologist, explaining what the process of brainwashing in a communist prison in China is. He's catching people fresh off the boat, as they say, in Hong Kong. They go to the prison, they spend 4 years in the Chinese thought reform brainwashing prison. When you get out, if you're a foreigner, they throw you out of the country. You don't get to stay. They ship you up, they put you on a boat to Hong Kong, good luck with your life. He's scooping them up in the first week after they land in Hong Kong and spending weeks with them, interviewing them about their experiences. So we're talking right out of Chinese thought reform prisons in the 1950s. He's interviewing them. And I'm reading this, he's describing what it's like, and I sit there and I look out the window and I think, this can't happen here. It's one of those things, like when you read a book about the Nazis and you're like, oh my God, this can't happen. Or the books you didn't have to read in high school about communist prisons, which are worse. This can't happen here. And then I remember thinking, oh my God, this is happening here. This is both social emotional learning and corporate diversity training. The descriptions of what are called in Chinese Pipan Dojang, critical struggle session, which happened in the cells, where your colleagues, your friends, your cellmates, whatever they happen to be, spend their time telling you why you should want to confess to the crime you got accused of that got put you in prison. You need to want to see how you are a criminal. You need to want to understand how you are complicit in systemic racism. You need to want to see how the attitudes you hold oppress gays and lesbians and trans people. You need to want to understand your crimes so you can confess to them to the judges who are interrogating you every day, so that you can confess to them and prove to them you see your crimes. You, in fact, the words in Chinese are recognize your crimes from the standpoint of the people. We've just changed the people and replaced it with the oppressed. Paulo Freire is a legendary Marxist educator who transformed, our kids all go to Paulo Freire schools. SEL is built out of Paulo Freire's model. Linda Darling Hammond, the kind of fairy godmother of SEL herself, says so in her foreword to the book called The Handbook of Social Emotional Learning. It says it's straight out of Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire says that the whole point of education needs to be not to learn to read, write, or do math or any of this, but to develop a political literacy, to conscientize, to see the world on the side of the oppressed, the same as to see the world from the side of the people. This is the purpose. This is brainwashing. Qinao, that's the Chinese term used. That gets translated as thought reform or brainwashing. Qinao. Qi means wash. Now means brain. The Chinese are blunt. Wash brain. Social emotional learning was devised to do that. Now, if that was all you knew about social emotional learning, I would pose to you the same question that I posed to the audience at the Moms for Liberty National Conference in July. If you knew that thanks to social emotional learning, if you knew that you were sending your children for 30 to 35 hours a week to a Maoist, communist, thought reform prison, what would you do differently? Because that's what social emotional learning, don't let me overspeak. They're not going to a abusive prison. They're going to a psychologically abusive government facility that is forcing them to adopt the correct perspective on a certain topic in order to get their competency matched so that they can be college and career ready, so that they can graduate. It's not the same thing at all. There's no physical abuse, at least not on purpose. So if you knew you were sending your children, thanks to social emotional learning, to a Chinese communist style, thought reform, brainwashing prison for most of their week, most of their day, what would you do differently? You need to think about that. And you need to go into this election thinking about that. And you need to go read the materials on social emotional learning for yourself, considering that this is a possibility. I'm not asking you to adopt the perspective. Read the books yourself. See if my conclusions are wrong. Please, I really, really, really hope I am. Challenge me on this. I really hope I'm wrong. But if this was all you knew about social emotional learning, I think your behavior and your attitudes toward it would change. I think you might not think, well, it's good that the school is teaching the kids to manage their emotions and do social stuff. Like, that's kind of important, and who wouldn't want that? The question isn't who wouldn't want that. The question is who would want a government facility deciding what the right answers to those kinds of questions are. But nobody's asking it that way, except Moms for Liberty. They don't co-parent with the government. If that's how much you trust social emotional learning now, and remember, this is the tool that Klaus Schwab recommends so that he can transform the world the way the agricultural revolution transformed the world, except that it's transforming you into some kind of a cyborg. Like on Time magazine, they published about 2 years ago an article that says 2045, the year man becomes immortal, with like a matrix, like a mannequin with like a matrix wire plugged into the back of its head. That's what those people are looking at this as an opportunity to do. If that's all you knew about it, you probably wouldn't trust it very much if you believed what I've said so far at least. And you should go verify it. Go read the stuff yourself. Go look up the Fetzer Institute. See who inspired John Fetzer. Go read her books. I'll give you a shortcut. Her name's Alice Bailey. Look her up. Alice Bailey. Look her up. See what the name of the publishing company she founded was. Just look it up. Find out where the office of that publishing company is. I'll give you a hint. It's at 866 United Nations Plaza. You can go look up which publishing company is housed in the United Nations building and look up its history. And that's where social emotional learning came from. Turns out that's where Common Core came from too. Turns out she had interesting beliefs. We'll leave it at that. If this is all you knew about social emotional learning, you would trust it very little. I'm telling you already, you need to trust it less. Social emotional learning sells itself as being data-driven. Anybody ever heard that? Evidence-based, data-driven. These are the brand names they stick out all the time. The evidence-based thing is a crock. There's a bait and switch. You guys know what a bait and switch is? That's where they sell you a Corvette, but it's got a Ford Pinto engine in it. Something like that. They're saying things that used to be called social emotional learning a long time ago. Things like James Comer's whole child education model, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Things that use teaching kids who are actually at risk. Social and emotional skills with a licensed psychologist when they're identified as at risk on legitimate terms in a therapeutic environment, teaching them to cope with that 30, 40 minutes here and there a week, whatever, twice a week, and sending them back to the classroom as a form of special ed. That's what they're saying. And you're like, yeah, well, we want that. Some kids fall through the cracks. It'd be great if the school could pick them up. But what they've done is redefined at risk as, in terms of at risk of not graduating social and emotional compliance. I'm not kidding. So every kid is at risk. And every kid is getting federal funding funneled into their school to implement social emotional learning because every kid is at risk. They're implementing it not in an individual way, focused on taking personal responsibility for your emotions and your social circumstances. They're putting it now in what they call systemic. It's woven into the subjects. Here's an example. How they're going to use the social emotional learning to do an equity lens. Here's a simple word problem. I told you we're doing a lot of math today. This one's a second grade, not calculus. You'll be good. Second grade word problem. Johnny is riding with his parents in the car to an amusement park. Sorry, Johnny is riding with his mom and dad. Let's phrase it right. In the car to an amusement park. The amusement park is 50 miles away. They have driven 30 miles. How much further do they have to go? What is it? 20 miles. Very good. So here's how this works. So the youngest person in the room gets it right immediately. Are you smarter than a second grader? Okay, so good job, by the way. I was a math teacher. I approve. 20 miles, that's the right answer. But here's how this is done through social emotional learning. The teacher says the word problem, maybe has it up on a projector, they can read it or whatever they do. I don't know how second grade works. And then she says, hey, this is a problem, but before we solve the math question, so put your hand down, before we solve the math question, let's talk about how many of you guys have ever been to an amusement park? Raise your hand. Some of the kids do and some of the kids don't. What are some reasons why maybe some kids haven't been to amusement parks? And eventually some kid raises his hand and says some people can't afford to go to amusement parks. And then they spend 30 minutes talking about poverty and its causes and what we can do about it and how it correlates with race. And your CRT lesson just happened. Johnny's going to the amusement park with his mom and dad. You guys ever drive anywhere with your parents? Are your parents? Tell me about that. Some little kid raised his hand. Well, my mom, all I have is my mom. My dad doesn't live at home. Now we're talking about feminism. Well, I have two moms. Now we're talking about sexuality. And they hijacked the lesson, straight out of a math lesson into a political lesson, and that's straight out of Paulo Freire's model that I told you they adopted. That's how it works. And what they're going to do is they're going to guide those answers through the equity frame. How do we deal with the fact that some kids can't afford to go to an amusement park? What would equity say? Equity would say, make it free. Make it free for some people. Make the rich people pay for it. Socialism. This is how social emotional learning actually works. So the evidence-based part is a crock. They have evidence for something that works in very specific circumstances under very specific paradigms, like that you are dealing with an actually at-risk kid, not in curriculum, for specifically trying to teach them to take personal responsibility for their social and emotional life so they can do better in school. And they're doing this transformative critical consciousness raising, SEL, through an equity frame, systemically woven into all the subjects. Into the math lessons, into the teaching, into the reading, into the writing, into the history. 1619 Project, anybody? Into the football coaching. Everything. That's what they're actually implementing, selling it on this thing that has some shaky evidence supporting it and not great evidence supporting it. Equivocal evidence. What about the data-driven? That's why you should really be scared of it, because it is data-driven. Read their stuff. The big problem with implementing social emotional learning, they tell you on virtually every major document, is we don't have enough data. Imagine implementing something throughout every single school, and the first thing you write about it is we don't have enough data to know how to do it. What this tells you, and I'm actually drawing off of somebody who analyzed it, not just my own opinion, so somebody at least agrees with me, is that this is proof that social emotional learning is a front for the data gathering. We need to do it to gather the data on it. But what are they gathering data on? They're surveying kids about suicide. They're surveying kids about political issues, political affiliations. How often do you think about death? Are you poor? How do you feel about your body changing? Do boys look at you funny when you're 12? All these different kinds of very personal, strange questions. They survey and survey and survey because the Every Student Succeeds Act, passed in 2015, mandates that they have to report on one non-academic competency. So they survey so they can have non-academic competency information that they can deliver to the federal government so that they can get their ESSA money. That's why. And Castle stepped into that void after lobbying to get ESSA passed, the Every Student Succeeds Act. Tell your legislators, repeal it. Castle lobbies to get it passed, steps into the void with consultants upon consultants upon consultants. I'm sure you've heard of the consultants. To go school system to school system to school system, and under about 100 or 200 different brand names around the country to implement SEL programs that rely on the Castle model. To implement the Castle SEL model, which is a transformative systemic thing being sold off of something else. But why are they gathering this data? Well, the same guy who said that the point of it is probably to gather the data, because why else would you try to build a plane while you fly it? Imagine how dumb that is because, in his own words, to create perfectly predictable and nudgeable consumers and perfectly controllable socio-political conditions in the population. So why does Klaus Schwab want social emotional learning with his ESG scam and the SDGs so badly? Because if they gather enough data off of your kids, whether through a social credit system or just nudging them through their devices and their wearable tech, then they know how to advertise to your children. They know how to propagandize your children in a perfectly personalized way through tools such as digital friends, which are supposed to be socially emotionally compliant. So your kid, if he has a problem, gets on his phone or his iPad or his Chromebook and talks to a digital friend that's actually like Microsoft or something and pours his guts. You guys listen, you ever see Harry Potter #2 where Ginny Weasley's writing Voldemort in a diary? It's literally that. This is why. Because they need the data to build the new world that they're going to cram everybody into. Because they don't know how that world's going to work if they don't know how to control everybody as perfectly predictable consumers and socio-political units. This is tyranny. The scope, so if like the agricultural revolution is a gigantic transformation, right, in history. This is tyranny on that scale. And social emotional learning is it is like the Jenga piece that if you push it out, it's falling over. If they can't data mine children, if they can't implement SEL, they are not going to have the data necessary to know how to control people in a way that forces them to adopt a new social contract and to demand these ESG things that they're using the data they're gathering to brainwash them into believing are existential crises that have right answers only viewable through the lenses of sustainability and inclusion, which are their buzzwords. That's what's happening in the world today. That's what you guys, unfortunately, are the point of the spear to deal with. Now, that's heavy, so I'm going to finish with actually, this is the second time I've had the opportunity to speak in this room, believe it or not. So I'll say something a little cute. You already know what to do. You already know what to do. You need to vote, you need to tell 2 friends, you need to get people to these meetings, etc. You know what you need to do. You need to go read this stuff for yourself. Educate yourselves. You already know what to do. You have to understand what it is, but turns out when I was 8 years old, I came to the Yorktown, and I got to speak in this room. We had we went to the Fort Sumter, we went to the we didn't go to the Battery, we went to all the boats, and we did all this stuff, and we had all these things. And I want you guys, because this is really what it boils down to. I want you to think it's not any more, all the stuff I said is super complicated. This isn't any more complicated than that. And so, me and my friend, we had the dreaded moments, Cub Scouts. We finally get to this last night. We're all sitting, I was sitting right over here, right where you guys are. And they said, everybody has to come up and say what you learned. First time we'd ever been to the beach for a lot of us. First time we'd ever seen the ocean. First time we'd ever been on a boat. The whole thing. Went out to Fort. So my friend Jake is a consummate Southerner. And Jake tripes up here. He is probably standing right about here. He's like, we went to Fort Sumter, and we learned that it was built out of 3,846,209 bricks. That's a lot of bricks. Everything I said is actually that simple. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. They're just some bad guys who think they have a big scheme. We'll call them Goliath. They've stepped in it by messing with our kids. So you guys are the thing they're the most afraid of. Why do you think they hate Moms for Liberty so much? Why do you think they show up and cause such a fuss? Why do you think that there's all this bad press that's fake news about Moms for Liberty? It's because you guys are the most dangerous thing to their plan, because A, you can resist it. B, if you get wise to it, you won't let it happen. And C, most importantly, you can and will protect your children and the children of this country. Thank you for having me.
Shut down. Woo!